Hello, I'm Marion. Welcome to Take Care of Yourself, which is going to be a talk about strategies and tools for better mental health in tech, and specifically when you're learning to program, which I'm still doing 5 years on. This is a collection of things that have helped me since I started to learn to code, all the way up to now, so 5 years on, where I'm now a senior developer at my current company. Also, I think this is the only terrible pun in this talk, so bear with me if there's any more. But first of all, a little bit about me. Tech was not the field that I wanted to work in when I was younger. I actually wanted to be a spy, and my dad told me to study modern languages, so I did modern languages. Then I decided out of university to go and work as a librarian, and then decided that that was a great job for when I would be 60 and had nothing better to do after my retirement. And then I changed careers again. Well, before I changed careers, I decided to go back to university to do a master's in international relations. Then I changed careers again when I decided to become a cyber intelligence analyst. So I was basically a spy, not for the government, just for a private company. And I realized that actually it's really boring work. Thankfully, this was a startup. So they had a dev team, and I realized that the dev team was actually the people doing the really cool stuff. So I was like, oh, hey, how do I become a dev? And they were like, well, you need to learn to code. So I did that. I went to Makers, a bootcamp in London, to learn to code. They're currently offering 6 scholarships in collaboration with Codebar. So go and apply because it's so worth it. I think you have until the 2nd of April to do so. So definitely go and get the details of Codebar. But when I finished Makers, I joined a mental health startup, and I have since left, and I am currently working at 8th Light, and I started about 3 years ago. And also because I like to make life difficult for myself, I'm also currently doing a part-time Masters of Science in Software Engineering at the University of Oxford, and I have a deadline in 2 days, so this is great timing for me. But when I'm not studying, I love eating potatoes, I love taking naps, I love talking about mechanical keyboards. So if you've got questions about any of those topics, please let me know. So for this talk, there's a few things that I'd like to tackle. First, a reminder that programming is hard and that you're not stupid. Then I want to talk about some of the tools and the strategies that I have been using since I started to code and that have helped me take care of myself. And finally, I'll be sharing some of the resources that I'm hoping will help you too. O-rings are one thing. You can also lube your switches, Gonzalo, in the chat. But the first thing that I want to discuss in relation to this talk is that programming is hard. As humans, we're used to other people being able to understand what we mean, even when we don't express ourselves very well. So as I said, I've studied modern languages and I had to do a year abroad. And I remember going to a tiny corner shop and like trying to tell the shopkeepers that I wanted a box of cereal, except I didn't know the word for box or cereal. So I had to settle for like pointing at the shelves and going like the red thing next to the blue thing. Thankfully, he understood what I meant because there was only one red thing. So he told me how to say cereal, how to say box, and off I went on my merry way. And I'm sure that, if you started programming or if you've been programming for a while, you've definitely encountered the dreaded computer says no, where your command line throws loads of red errors at you and like stupid messages that are sometimes really unhelpful. And this is what you get. So this is the very first piece of Python code that I ever wrote. I barely knew anything about programming at the time. I think this was back in 2014 or 15. And I had been tasked with writing a program that should calculate the Fibonacci suite. Also worth mentioning, I am terrible at maths, so I had to Google Fibonacci suite because I couldn't remember what it was. If you're familiar with Python, you might realize how bad this code is. If you're not, and you're just reading it and going like, what on earth is going on? Well, that's what I'm doing looking at this to this day. So don't worry about it. It's just terrible. It's bad. But I like to keep it around to remind myself of how far I've got. So, like it's really nice to be able to actually finally put websites together. But sometimes I'm like, I know nothing. And then I look at this and I'm like, oh, actually, I do know some things. But, sometimes after one too many errors, like showing up on my screen, or like when I'm having a bad day because I like run out of potatoes or I didn't get a nap and I just want to like quit programming entirely, then what happens is that I'm like, okay, plan B. I'm just going to move to Scotland. I'm going to raise those fluffy cows and I'm going to go take pictures of the countryside. This is the plan B. However, I've never had to resort to it. I'm still programming professionally. So instead of, going off to Scotland, what I've done instead is learn to improve my mental health so that I have fewer, I'm going to move to Scotland days. And so the first part that I want to tackle are tools. Tools in this instance are things that that you can do to work on your mind. They're like books and apps, and you can practice those things a little bit every day to get better. For a little bit of background, I was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder about 10 years ago, so I've dealt with anxiety at work a lot. I went to therapy a few times as well, most recently for perfectionism, because it was literally stopping me from like doing anything at work. I was just like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to do it, so I can't do these things. But all of these tools have helped me, and I hope that if you find yourself in the same situation as I was, they will help you too. The very first one that I want to tackle is practicing self-compassion. And in my mind, compassion is like the best thing by far that anyone can cultivate. It's better than empathy, it's better than sympathy, it's better than self-pity. Practicing compassion and self-compassion will help you see the bigger picture. So like, no, you didn't get an error in your program because you're stupid. You got an error in your program because you tried something that you didn't know about and it didn't quite work yet. Self-compassion will help you silence that nagging voice that is at the back of your head and that can be so negative. And practicing it reduces feelings of guilt and shame because you understand why you did something, why it may have been wrong, and you also remember that everyone does make mistakes and that, you know, next time you know better. And ultimately, self-compassion increases our connections with others because we realize that they're just as flawed as we are. And so you know that they have their weaknesses, that they have their good and bad days, and that these are not necessarily a reflection of who we are as people. Their actions and their behavior don't necessarily reflect on their relations with you. It's an indicator that they're having something that's going on in their lives that, you know, you might not be aware of. So it's easier when you remember those things to be kinder to others. And finally, it allows us to be more mindful of our thoughts and actions. It allows us to catch ourselves before saying something hurtful to ourselves or to others. So self-compassion is important in tech, not only because it makes us better communicators with others, like it helps create that network around people that can be so helpful in a team, especially when you are in an environment where you pair a lot. It can help us get on better with team members. It can help us voice our opinions and concerns more easily, but also it helps us build better relationship with ourselves. So when you're kinder to yourself, you perform better, or at least more sustainably than if you're drowning in guilt or you're constantly under pressure. And this brings me to my second technique, which is often used in coordination with self-compassion, actually, which is to reframe your thoughts. And a couple of days ago, I finished a book called The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. Very good book, recommend it if you haven't read it. But there's a quote in there that I felt was really illustrative of what reframing your thoughts can do to you. And so the quote is, "It was interesting," she mused to herself, "how life sometimes simply gave you a whole new perspective by waiting around long enough for you to see it." And while you can certainly wait for life to offer you that new perspective, reframing your thoughts or learning to do so is a common technique that's used in cognitive behavioral therapy. It will help you do that, except it'll do it far quicker than for you to just wait for life to change your perspective. Now, the technique is very effective not only for your mental health, because you'll be able to take a more objective look at your negative thoughts, but also for your work, because teaching yourself to reframe your thoughts will actually teach your brain to be more flexible in its thinking and to automatically consider other alternatives, other ideas. So it's very helpful for that. And so it can not only help you look at your thoughts more objectively, but it will also help you become less critical of yourself. So if you've ever thought, oh my God, I'm stupid, I'll never be able to do it, because you were, coding and your computer didn't want to do what you were asking it to do, then reframing this thought could follow a few steps. So like the first one, for example, usually you get a worksheet with like a number of columns. So the first column would be looking at the situation. So for example, I'm in front of my computers, I've been trying to figure out a problem for the past 2 hours and I'm getting nowhere, which is the story of my life. And I'm sure many of our stories out there. The second column looks at your feelings and emotions. So you're gonna list your feelings, your emotions, and you're gonna give them a rating. So for example, I'm disappointed, I'm afraid, I'm doubtful, I feel exhausted, I have a weight on my chest, I'm really anxious, and these can range for like, I don't know, 0 to 10. The column after that looks at your negative automatic thoughts. So for me, for example, it would have probably been, oh my God, I'm stupid, I can't do it, I should have never been hired, they're going to fire me. And the column after that will look at the evidence that support the thought. So for example, well, when my coworker came to help me, he solved it really quickly, or like, this happens to me all the time at work, every single week, every single day, I struggle with something like that. And the magic starts to happen in the next column, which is going to be looking at the evidence that does not support the thought. So for example, oh, actually earlier this week, I did manage to complete a ticket all by myself. Or like when my coworker said that the first time he saw this problem, it took him a week to fix. It's like, oh, okay, you know what? It's not just me, it's actually a complex problem. And this column will gather sort of anything that provides a more balanced alternative to your negative thoughts. And then the column after that is going to be coming up with the alternative thoughts. So you do that by asking yourself, knowing what you know now about the thought, what would be a more accurate way of responding to the situation? And in the case that I've just been discussing, it could be, well, I ended up working on a difficult issue that I'd never encountered before. It's normal to feel frustrated and flustered, and it was a complex issue that takes a lot of time to learn. And I still have a lot to learn, so I will be kinder to myself in the future. And finally, the last column is for you to reassess your emotions or feeling, and hopefully they have decreased since first experiencing them. Reframing your thoughts, excellent. 10 out of 10 would recommend for anything in life. The next tool that I use is Mindfulness. No, it's not a new one. There's tons of resources out there. I'm sure you've seen it around. I found it very helpful, and you will probably find it most commonly associated with meditation. Now, the main thing for me that I think people should remember about mindfulness is that the aim of it is not to have no thoughts. It's not to have an empty mind, but rather it's to be able to notice faster when your thoughts are drifting away from what it is that you were doing, for you to be able to refocus faster on what it is that you were doing. So not only can mindfulness help you not get caught in thoughts, emotions, whether they're positive or negative, it will also help you, learn to focus better, which if you have issues with focus, can help greatly. And also it will, help you notice that sometimes, when you've got too far deep in the Stack Overflow sidebar reading, and that you need to go back to your code, you'd be like, okay, I've been staring at this article on whether dragons can fly for 30 minutes. It's time for me to get back to my work. And instead of judging yourself going like, oh my God, I've been lazy again, it's just like, okay, you know what? My brain just took a left turn. That's fine. We're going to go back on the main road now. And it can actually also help you notice faster if you've gone down a rabbit hole when you're trying to solve a problem, and you kind of get that feeling that's like, okay, this is not quite right. I'm going to keep pushing. It's like, maybe you shouldn't keep pushing. Maybe you should stop here and ask for help instead. One more tool that I found really enjoyable is to practice gratitude. Another one that's also becoming more and more popular for good reasons. It does make you notice the good in your life more easily. There is scientific evidence that it helps a lot. It seems a bit wishy-washy at first, because all you have to do is just like list 3 or 4 or 5 things that you're happy for in your day. So for example, like, I'll wake up in the morning and be like, well, I'm grateful for a good night's sleep. I'm grateful for the sun shining outside. Or like when I used to commute to work, oh, I'm very grateful that I got a seat on the tube. Yes. But the thing is, after that, like, you will build the habit of recognizing the little wins and the little achievements and the little happy things. So if you're having a bad day at work or with your code, you can remind yourself of the happy times, which makes it a lot easier to bear with those times when your computer just throws red at you, which happens a lot. Finally, upgrade your mindset. Psychologist Carol Dweck devotes an entire book to the topic of mindset that I highly recommend you read. Don't worry, I will give you all the links and resources at the end of this talk. But she posits that people fall under 2 categories of mindset: the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. So fixed mindset, great, thanks English. A fixed mindset believes that intelligence or talent are fixed qualities that can't be improved upon. And so these people end up not developing their skills because they believe that success comes from talent only, and that if you need to put a lot of effort into doing something, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it. On the other hand, a growth mindset believes that most skills can be developed with a required amount of work and dedication. So as a result, people are less afraid of making mistakes, they're more accepting of failure, and they're more resilient in the face of setbacks as well. So very helpful when you're faced with your favorite friend, the computer that throws red at you. A growth mindset is very, very, very important when you program, because there is just so much to learn, and you keep having errors thrown at you, just making me reconsider your life. Well, making you reconsider your life rather. And the thing is, because there's so much to learn, you can't really expect talent to carry you through. There's going to be things that you're really good at, whether that's like, I don't know, front end or back end, or maybe you're really good at like DevOps, and there's other things that you're going to be not so good at. And it's a good reminder to tell yourself that, with a bit of work and a bit of effort, you will get there. It doesn't really matter how long it takes, you can get there. The next part of my talk is strategies. These strategies are just techniques that I use every day to implement the tools that I've discussed earlier. And the first one that I have is to keep track and to log what it is that I do during the day. So this is an example of a document that I write every day. And what I do is that I create a new document every day detailing what I plan on doing, any notes that I might want to make, issues that I've run into, how I solve them, resources that I found useful in that day. And it's slightly different from a to-do list, because while there is a to-do list element about this, it also links back to what it is that I was doing. So not only do I like keep in mind what it is that I wanted to do, I've also got a reference to how I solved it. So having those things means that invariably when I have the same error like 2 days later, because I've encountered the same problem, instead of trying to remember how I fixed it, I can just refer back to my notes and resources. It's also a good way of keeping track of the progress that I've made, because the notes become like tangible evidence of the work that I have put in and the things that I've learned that I didn't know of before. And finally, I add and remove sections as needed. So like recently I added a shout out section to keep track of the things that I thought I had done well, or that someone thanked me for or congratulated me for. So like recently, for example, just on Friday at work, we spent like a whole morning with my coworker trying to like figure out something, and then I can't remember what I did. I accidentally added like a semicolon somewhere and it worked, and we're like, oh my god, this is great. I definitely put that in the shout out section, because accidentally typing the right solution is definitely a win. The next strategy that I really like to use is blogging. And I think a lot of people are worried about blogging because they feel they're not technical enough to write about programming. Maybe they're like, oh no, I'm too junior, I can't do that. And there's a different perspective that you can adopt towards blogging. And that is that, it's use it as a repository for what you learn. In a more structured way, like write it for yourself. So if it helps others and it's read by others, then that's great, but like use it for you first. Use it as an opportunity to research the issue that you want to discuss in more details. Use it as a way to improve your knowledge, as a way to understand your area of research better. And ultimately it will help you to like think about other aspects of your chosen topic, so that in the future, if you encounter the same error or you have to work with the same tool, then you have a better understanding of how it works. Now, if you're looking for a friendly community, I recommend dev.to to start writing. It's a platform dedicated to less experienced programmers. It's got a wealth of information and support, and it is so much kinder than Stack Overflow. So I would definitely recommend it. Next up, asking for help is a classic one, but you've got to learn to do it. Asking for help is a bit tough because you need to like let go of your ego or your guilt or your shame, and you'll have to learn to be vulnerable and ask for a hand. And in order to make the process a bit simpler, there's a general rule going about in the dev community that you shouldn't focus, or rather you shouldn't struggle on the problem for like more than 30 minutes, because after that, you're probably just getting too frustrated. So if you don't make meaningful progress after 30 minutes, just tell yourself, okay, stop, go and ask someone else. Now, when you do that, make sure that you time box the time that you're going to need from someone else as well, because that will help them make a better decision about whether they can help you or not. And also determine a sort of hierarchy of helpers. So the coworker that's on the project with you or on your ticket with you should probably be your first port of call. A coworker who's on your team but not necessarily on your project could be the next port of call. Someone who has some experience in the stack that you're using, maybe the call after that. And you're a rockstar friend at Facebook or Google, maybe the last call, because while they're really good at what they're doing, they also don't have the context on the problem that you're trying to solve at the moment. So yeah, finally, learning how to ask good questions is also incredibly important, because just don't go up to someone and be like, oh, it's all broken, I don't know what's going on. You've got to give context. You've got to let them know what your assumptions are, what you've tried, the behaviors that you've observed, etc., or essentially anything that can help them understand the issue faster. And finally, recognizing your own achievements is crucial to making progress. Celebrating the big and the small wins will help you build more confidence and improve your resilience. So make sure that you keep track of the things that you did that you were proud of, whether it's illustrating them in a blog post, or reminding yourself of them in a daily log, or even just like screenshots of shout outs that you've been given by others in Slack. And also make sure to ask for feedback, because that may highlight behaviors and situations where you have shined and did not realize that you had. And this brings me to the end of my talk. So here are some links to some resources. I will now post them in the chat. And this is also time for questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up or write them down in the chat. And these are not linked because I'm a sausage. Let's see. Right. Okay, well, make sure that you add HTTPS in front of the, of the URLs. Okay, what tool do I use for the daily log? I use my own. So in the first link that I provided, there is actually a tool to, there's a link to a template that I use that you can either like fork the repo if you want, or copy the template and use it on your own. If you're looking for something that does it really nicely, I recommend Obsidian, which is a note-taking app. Someone in there has created a plugin called Daily Template that automatically creates a new markdown document for you to write in, and it works really well with this. Okay, so here's the logging. And here is the repository. Cool. And the tool that I use with this is this one. Interestingly, I was going to say, interestingly, I use Obsidian for coding related things. I use Notion for everything else. I don't know why I have two different tools, but I just don't like Notions for code. I like my code to look like code, I guess. And that is exactly the template link. Thank you, Alex. Right, okay, so I saw talk of cake that I missed. Right, let's see. Mark, 22 minutes ago, you asked me if I were going to be a spy. Yes, that's what I wanted to do originally. And I guess ethics and morals caught up. And I was like, you know what, I don't actually really fancy researching people in great depth and tell the government everything that I know about them. So no, got off the bandwagon here. Gonzalo asks, how can I quiet my mechanical keyboard? I have a great series of posts about mechanical keyboards that I'd be more than happy to share if you want to contact me on Twitter. Other than that, Plan B is going to Portugal and becoming a farmer lumberjack. I approve of that greatly. Alex, write again with the Midnight Library book. Okay, grateful for pastries. Yes, I had a croissant this morning and it was delicious. Sorry, I'm catching up on the chat now. Okay, I'm all cool. Okay, Katya asks, do you block out time for these techniques, or do you just weave them into your daily life? Honestly, they come and go. I actually suck a lot at habits or keeping habits. So I'll start doing something and then I'll do it like intensely for like 3 months and then just stop entirely and never touch it again for a year. But usually I try to like weave them into my daily life. So the daily log, for example, I do in the morning just before I start working, just because it helps me get into like working mode. Meditation and mindfulness, I tend to try and practice when I eat, because I tend to just like eat really quickly otherwise and just like watch a video on YouTube or something like that. And I found that I feel more full once I've eaten mindfully. So I'll just like take my time chewing my food. And I also meditate. I only meditate as I'm about to go to sleep, or when I've just woken up, because at any other time during the day, I will fall asleep during my meditation session. So I do love napping, but not everything has to become nap time.